We are pleased to have Brett Peterson here from Juvenile Justice Services, and I'm going to let Brett introduce himself to you. And thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. All right, I'll try not to move around too much. I know we're doing a slide deck. I'll also try not to bore everyone to death with a slide deck. But it's also, I recognize too that I'm pretty much alone here in this room. I've got, luckily, 2 wonderful audience members and a couple admin out here. So we'll try to keep it a little bit lively and kind of moving forward. So I am Brett Peterson, in the flesh, live and in person. No, but I'm Director of Juvenile Justice Services. So I've been in this role about 2 years. Prior to that time, I actually came into Human Services. I actually was the Director of the Office of Licensing there for just a very brief span. Before that, I worked at the Attorney General's office. I was Assistant Attorney General. My primary role is General Counsel for the Department of Human Services. So that's a little bit about me. So what I want to hopefully talk about today is when Bob kind of approached me on this was asking, what are the things that prosecutors should know about juvenile justice services? I know this is a juvenile justice track, so obviously there's some more expertise as well. So I tried to think through what are maybe some of the service array questions that may come up, things that are useful to know as a prosecutor, but also just, kind of in your role, whether it's in juvenile court or in district court, knowing what's available for youth and families. Also, given the dynamics of the legislative session, which, by the way, if you guys didn't know, the last day of the session, a pandemic started, and just FYI. And so I'm also going to cover a couple of the key policy aspects, a few changes in legislation that came on this last year that I think are relevant. So for some of you, it may be old hat. I was able to work with quite a few prosecutors in some of the legislative changes we'll talk about today. So again, I'll try to kind of stay high level, but also opening the door if there's any questions. One thing that I wanted to mention, so Bob gave out his number there. I will give you guys my cell phone. And the reason why I'll do that, so my number is 385-394-4407. And the reason I do that is because fundamental to me in doing this work, serving our communities, is the ability to find partnerships. And I believe that our prosecutor partners are a critical piece in that puzzle. And so I'm always open as you guys are navigating the spaces that you're in. If there's areas where we can be of assistance, or if there's things we need to do better, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I offer that genuinely. Super high level, and again, I'll kind of move through this, but again, thinking of things that are relevant. COVID. So we operate, about 17 facilities statewide. So that's our detention facilities, long-term secure facilities. So obviously, COVID has not left us unscathed. However, I can say that we have had as good a response as any system nationally, as far as in our detention facilities, in our long-term care facilities, recognizing that, especially detention, it's really impossible to control. I mean, in the sense that there's a flow. So right now I do have active cases in 3 facilities, in my Provo facility, in my detention, Salt Lake Detention, and Ogden, our Weber Valley Detention right now. We have 1 case in each. So the reason I share that here is I know sometimes those things come up in court, and defense may raise that as an issue of saying, hey, we need to have this kid released, those kind of things. Just knowing, and again, you can always reach out to me if you're wanting to know what's the current status. Also, I think that's relevant is on our website, jjs.utah.gov. Just go to the COVID, again, I'm thinking for a prosecutor's perspective, if you go into our COVID protocols, you can see all the things that we are doing, all the things that are in place to ensure a safe and healthy environment. Okay, I'm gonna jump in. So don't have a ton of people in the audience here directly, but they might get to call out a response here. Does anyone recognize this building? Any guesses? Any stabs? I mean, there's only 3 of you, so.
Future primary children.
Future primary. Good. You're on the right track. So it is a hospital. It's actually LDS Hospital in Salt Lake. The photo's kind of hard because it's up mostly, that's not how it looks street level. And you may be asking, why would I have a picture of LDS Hospital? So about 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. And within a day, within 24 hours of that diagnosis, I had the opportunity to move into LDS Hospital, where I got to live for about the next 6 months. I had a little break in between. And I share that with you, and how this will connect to our presentation today is, what I can tell you is from day one, there was very clear policies, there was very clear protocols on how they were going to treat and try to save my life. The doctors were on their game. You know, it was, you're going to do this kind of chemo, you're going to do this type of radiation, we're going to do this blood transfusion, you know, all of it. And that's the only, and ultimately leading to a bone marrow transplant. That's what they do. That's what they know how to do. What I found was that didn't do very much for kind of my headspace. You know, what was in between my two ears. And what made the difference there was people that consistently were willing to show up in my life. There's still people showing up in my life. So these are friends, families, coworkers, actually a couple prosecutors that I'm good friends with, that would come and see me. I mean, every single day I had someone there visiting me. And why I love to share that in venues like this, where I'm talking to fellow public servants, is that's what each of you have made the decision to do, working in this work. You've decided and made a choice that you're going to show up. You're showing up for your community. You're showing up for those that you serve. You're showing up for families. You're showing up for victims, all of it across the spectrum. And I really honor that, and I appreciate that, because I think we can get very technical and drilled into the policy, and some of that we'll go through today, but recognizing kind of the why behind our work, knowing that I sit at different seats than you guys sit in, and so sometimes there's not perfect alignment there, but recognizing that why. I think that's really critical to ground ourselves in. So, that's just, I just knew you guys needed a picture of my beautiful face. That's actually a picture of me. So this was actually during the legislative session 3.5 years ago. And my nurses, this was like a year, so this was like 3 years ago. About a year ago, my nurses were like, "Where would you always go? We'd know you got out of your room," because I lived there forever. Well, they didn't, unbeknownst to them, and speaking about juvenile justice, I have a little bit of a delinquent streak in me. I would go and I'd leave the hospital. They didn't tell me I couldn't. So I'd go on these walks all through the avenues in my little gown. So my nurses, when they found this out, they were like, "What? You know, please tell us you didn't have chemo running when you did that." And then they zoomed in on this picture, because I was showing them this picture on my phone. And one of those little bags there, I don't know which one you use, the little yellow label, that is chemo. And so they were just like, "Never mind, let's just act like we didn't see this picture. Swipe right or swipe left," or whatever one you do to move it on. So anyway, that's me. So again, Human Services, that's where JJS is housed. We're within the Department of Human Services. Our mission in JJS is to change young lives, support families, and keep communities safe. I do try to stay grounded in those items, recognizing there's kind of intersections there. You can see how they can easily kind of stack. For those of you that may not know completely on our continuum, is we do have a kind of continuum of services in this space. So everything from on the kind of the front end is our youth services, which includes our receiving centers, our early intervention models, our school-based outreach, all of those things. And depending on where you're at in the state, we do have those resources available in each judicial district in Utah. Then as you're kind of moving over, kind of coming to I don't know what direction you guys are at here, but my right, if I'm looking at this screen, the next is detention, which we run all the detentions for the state. There's no other entity that runs juvenile detentions. Our day skills programs, those are primarily day programs for probation, kids on probation, typically. So they have some kind of court involvement. It's not true front end, but it's still more front end. And then we look at all of our community placements, our case management, who work with our providers when youth are placed in the community, secure care, and then parole and transition. And if there's any questions, text the numbers. or these folks can shout them out, I guess, right?
Please.
Only easy questions. I mean, it's Friday. I don't have a watch, but 1:40. I mean, we should be relaxing, ready to kick our heels up. Okay, so some policy changes. So I want to walk through a couple of the key pieces of legislation just from this last year. So like I said, they haven't come online that many months ago, and I know a lot of us have been, our heads have been buried in the COVID world. So some of these you guys, like I said, might be totally up to speed on, but if not, we'll kind of walk through them a little. So the first one was House Bill 384. So House Bill 384 was, it was a follow-on, but also a change. This was Representative Lowry Snow. And there's really, it was a huge bill, if anyone had the wonderful pleasure to read it. It was really, really thick and fun. But there's really 5 main buckets, and that's kind of what I'll just touch upon today, and I can drill in wherever you guys would like. So the first bucket is the bill limits the ability to transfer youth. So what this took out of the code essentially was it limited transfer to just aggravated offenses. Left direct file where it was 16, 17-year-olds for murder, ag murder, but everything else, it was just the only offenses that can be transferred now is those aggravated offenses. Also allows for the possibility of extended jurisdiction. So I haven't seen one of these yet. So yeah, I don't know. Most of the cases I've seen since this bill passed have all pretty much been direct file. I don't even know if I've seen a certification yet. I know there's a couple of juvenile prosecutors here, so that's who I'm talking to, audience out in the ether. So what this mechanism allows for is a youth on one of those aggravated offenses, prosecution or defense could raise and request or seek this extension of jurisdiction, potentially keeping them in juvenile justice services up to 25. So that can come in 2 different junctures. It could come before, like a bind over proceeding, before a certification proceeding, just say, okay, or instead of, I guess you'd say, not before, instead of, or it can come after. So if someone seeks certification, it doesn't play out, this is something they could say, okay, well then we want to have extended jurisdiction. So we'll see where that goes. I'll be able to share with you guys a few things at the end today that apply to all the youth in our care, but especially as we're moving towards a little bit older of a population, a little bit more of that emerging adult population, which I will have you guys know. I mean, our average population right now is still, I don't know the exact number, but it's still right around that 16, 17-year-old, which is probably not surprising to any of you, but that is kind of its national trend. Like juvenile justice, the age groups have kind of just continued to kind of bump up. So more kids are around 17, less kids are in that lower age range. Okay, the other buckets that I think are really critical, again, for this audience. First is length of stay. I don't know how I got all the space there. Length of stay exemptions and loss of life exemptions. I'm going to go to the loss of life exemptions first because it stacks kind of on the other. And these were both items we worked on with, victim's voice in play when we were considering it, and also with prosecutorial input and guidance, also saying, look, this is what we really are seeing and would be helpful, especially as we somewhat narrow those gates on certification. So the loss of life exemptions, if you guys recall in House Bill 239, there was some pretty tight kind of policy constraints put in place as far as who can be put into JGS secure care, into JGS custody, and also the presumptive lengths of stay, 3 to 6 months. That's the presumptive length of stay. That's still there. Except for like aggravated offenses, what it was kind of historically. So with number 4 here, what that indicated was, or what that said is if someone had died, essentially, if there was a loss of a life, then both those things were open. It doesn't matter what kind of the charge was, a youth could be placed into JGS secure care or JGS custody. Also, they would be outside of the presumptive lengths of stay. So that's the first part. Now the second, so now I'm going back to 3. This was a tweak, again, hearing prosecutorial voice, having kind of concerns raised as we were walking through the session and going, looking at this gigantic bill. This length of stay exemption said if a youth is in JGS custody, if they're on parole, from secure care, and they commit an offense, even if it's an offense that would historically be in that presumptive length of stay bucket, they would be outside of that presumptive length of stay. So that's one I'm assuming we have seen some of those, knowing the population. But those were kind of the 2 key changes there. This last one too is the school-based referrals. So if you guys recall, in House Bill 239, it eliminated the ability to have a youth referred to juvenile court for a school-based offense, and category of school-based offenses, basically your status offenses and Class Cs. Then the next session, I can't remember the bill now, 132, thank you. House Bill 132 came on and created a sunset and said, okay, we'll pause on that, and we're gonna pause for 2 years. Last year, the 2 years was at an end. We have seen those referrals drop dramatically. But again, I think hopefully a theme is partnership. One of our partners, the schools, came forward and said, seems like it's working, like we're on the right path, but we're not ready to pull that trigger and have this function gone completely. And so I think, again, kind of working through a compromise, this was extended an additional 2 years, and also a caveat in there that before that petition could be filed, or before it could be referred to juvenile court, before it could be referred to juvenile court, they would have to refer for early intervention services with JGS, with our youth services, which I'll talk a little bit about today. Those are the big buckets. Is there any questions? Okay, good, thanks. Sorry, I'm gonna take a drink. I don't want to pull a Marco Rubio moment. I don't know if you guys remember that a few years ago. He was given it was like the post-convention Republican response, and he literally couldn't talk. His mouth was so dry. And then he kept doing this, real slow, sneaking his water bottle, we didn't all see him. You guys can see that, I know. So, like I said, it's Friday at 1:45 here. We can have a little fun, all 5 of us. Okay, so next bill, House Bill 262. So this was Representative Craig Hall, and there's a couple pieces to this. I don't have them kind of put out in those buckets. I actually just include the links on here. Really, the primary aspect of House Bill 262 is you can't file a delinquency petition for someone who's under the age of 12 without first having a series of steps. So essentially, if a youth, the first thing would have to be dealt with through a non-judicial. Now there are carve-outs to that. Let me see, actually, is this a live document? I could pull up let me see here. Yeah, it looks like we can. Oh no, never mind. I was just gonna see if we can pop that up. That's okay. So I put the line numbers in there too for anyone who wants to look into that. So I think the specific elements that are worthy of note is, so first, any kid under 12 has to have been dealt with through a non-judicial, essentially. There are carve-outs for your aggravated offenses. And then with non-judicials, we know that those are kind of presumptive 3 months. They can be extended another 3 months, kind of traditionally. So the question came up as we were navigating this bill was, but what about some of the sex-specific cases? And I think there was a lot of consensus around the idea that, look, we should be looking at 10 and 11-year-olds a little differently. I mean, this is and I know it's so hard in juvenile justice. You guys, we're always having kind of these arbitrary markers on age, and that's what we kind of have to do sometimes, but so it's challenging. It's not like a clear-cut thing. But there was a lot of consensus around that, is okay, we think we should try a different path with a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old. Originally, the bill was for a 12-year-old too. So it was 13 and under 13, sorry. I always mix those up. Not as much consensus on that, because there was a lot of people saying, we see these kids 12, 13, this is what we're seeing. So, but even with that 11, 10-year-old population, one of the issues that came up, like I said, was on the sex-specific population. Was obviously there are some questions from a research perspective of the nature of that type of behavior at that age. However, we also know that many of the treatment modalities to respond to sex-specific treatment or sex-specific behaviors are much beyond 3 months, much beyond 6 months. So we were trying to kind of find a spot there where we can still ensure. I think what everyone continued to say is we want to make sure that these kids are getting services of this age. That's what we want to see. So we didn't want to create a false barrier to that. So for kids who have a sex-specific offense, even under that age, their non-judicial can go on. Really, the language is indefinitely. There would have to be a hearing, but they could continue if they're saying, well, look, here's what's happening. And then obviously if it's refused or if there's a failure, then those could be petitioned. I don't think there's anything additional on the House bill. Kind of correlating with this or corresponding, we already had administrative rule and statute that we wouldn't book kids under 10 into detention. And then corresponding with this, we also filed administrative rule. Now that same population, except for the carve-outs, we would have those exemptions from detention. So, any questions on that? Okay, good. Yes, I can. Got through another one. Senate Bill 65, this one is probably not like something that's just jumping out a bunch of prosecutors. I think it's useful though, just because child welfare and juvenile justice, really it's the same kids and it's the same population. We see them, we see these kids they really are the same, although they might be being dealt with in a little bit different system. I think this is noteworthy. And I'll also, just in this last special session, there was an additional bill that I don't have the bill number that kind of tagged onto this. So really what this said was there was still a carve out for youth that had no delinquency, that were in child welfare custody, that were AWOL essentially. I can't think of the right term that they use, and it's a lapse for me for a second, that they could still be placed in detention. So there had to be a finding, there had to be, a judge. It was kind of like a best interest type finding, like, look, there's kind of an imminent harm. But DCFS felt, and the Department of Human Services felt, that really no non-offending youth should be held into a locked detention setting. And so this bill just clarified that, took that out. The other aspect of this that we kind of, and I think again, this kind of probably is more helpful on thinking of the continuum and thinking how we have to continue to do our best to meet kids' needs where they're at, to help stop further system involvement and deepening. The other element of that was we've historically, both juvenile justice and child welfare, we've served this population that we call ungovernable, which I think a lot of us know what that is when we see it. These are youth who maybe they're not picking up any delinquency yet, but there's some real high behavioral health needs maybe. There's a lot of acting out, they're running away, they're getting in fights with parents. And what we would see sometimes in the child welfare arena was those youth, that type of behavior, even though it was really about services, it would end up triggering a dependency proceeding in juvenile court. And so we would see kids sometimes coming into the foster care system when really it was just about services. It wasn't about anything with the parent. There was no abuse or neglect. And there wasn't, at that point, really any delinquency. Maybe some, but pretty minimal. So that was a pivot there saying, okay, JGS, your early intervention services will continue to serve these kids. We're not going to have them potentially lead into this child welfare route when there's no abuse or neglect. The other element to that now in this last special session is, and this was fully a child welfare bill, but it was that a youth cannot come into DCFS custody through dependency for services alone unless there's essentially some additional staffings. That's really the way. So it's not like it's never, but essentially saying, look, if really we're talking about services, we don't want to just pull that trigger, put kids into DCFS custody. So if it's just about getting them the service, we feel like we can do that in a different way without pulling them into the foster system. So that's it on policy. Is there any questions at all?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this specific question. Is the have not committed any delinquency that they've never committed any delinquency, or they haven't committed any delinquency in relation to that book? We sometimes see these other detention things, and I want to know which ones we said get out. They can't be here.
Right.
They can't hear the question.
Yeah. So the question was, when I say they haven't committed any delinquency, is it just it hasn't risen to the level where they're booked or, it's not, is that kind of along those lines?
No history whatsoever.
Yeah, no, many of them do have a history. So yes, so that's a good clarifying question. And so they still, like I said, they certainly may need services. They may be involved with probation. I think the department felt that, what the outcomes we would see when they actually end up in the foster care system, we wanted to kind of minimize it. But yeah, you definitely know these kids. I mean, you see them for sure. So thank you. All right, let's move to the next. So speaking of that, and then you guys seriously, any questions you have as you kind of go along, or if you're thinking, even here in this audience, like if there's something you're like, oh, this is what we need to know, please speak up. So, and I'm going to be able to share a few data points with you guys today as well that really demonstrates. So we all know we've been on this kind of journey, sometimes hand in hand, sometimes maybe not hand in hand, but we've been on a journey of juvenile reform in Utah. And one of the, promised fruits of that journey was that, look, there will be additional resources available for youth and family. That is something that I'm not saying that we have a panacea that is answering all concerns, but it is something we actually are starting to see. We are starting to witness an ability to serve youth kind of on that front end that did not historically exist in Utah very effectively. It was not very, very long ago that, I think many people who are listening in, or people who are in child welfare, or people that are in the agencies, can recall staffing cases where we're like, well, we got to get them into DCFS custody to get this service. Oh, hopefully we can stack up enough charges to get them into JJS to get this service. What we're trying to do is eliminate those types of barriers to serving youth and families. So that's what I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about right now with our youth services. And I know I see a few folks actually here in person who've actually kind of seen this presentation, this part of it. So, be patient with me here as we go along. So our youth service model, what this really is our front end kind of preventative model. This is something that we've been able to stand up statewide. We've been able to really bolster it statewide. It started in Weber County in our Ogden, based out of our Ogden facility there. And the idea is, this slide actually is just kind of a graphic. It's not that super helpful. This one's a little more helpful. The idea with youth services, and this is how it actually works as a practice model now today, is that no matter how a youth comes to the door, it really doesn't matter. So primarily for us, these are school-based referrals, typically. So it's someone with there's some things going wrong at school. They're habitually truant. They're kind of acting out. Having some of these other things going. Maybe status offense type situations. Things that we know are typically indicative of greater family challenges, or maybe that youth is in need of some more services. So no matter how a kid is referred to our youth service model, so whether it's a school referral, whether it's a law enforcement referral, so this kind of ties into our receiving centers, whether it's a parent referral, whether it was a prosecutor referral, it really doesn't matter how they come in. Each kid will be screened consistently using evidence-based tools to screen. And we screen for mental health, we screen for substance use, trauma, and then suicidality, suicide risk, using kind of validated evidence-based tools to do those screenings. Through that screening, what we may see with many of these kids, sometimes, what's the term, pathologize? I won't even try to say a big word, but we overserve sometimes. Sometimes we're so focused on getting a service, like meaning, I'm going to put you in this kind of type of therapy. I'm going to give you this kind of treatment. Sometimes that is needed. What we find with many kids, many families, what's really needed is kind of some more informal supports. It's kind of like some case management maybe. Maybe we call it plan management on this front end, is really just someone to hold your hand to walk you and your family through the dilemma or challenges you're facing. All of it with an eye towards reducing risk, and also trying to ensure that youth aren't deepening into the system, that they're not going out and committing a delinquent act. So many kids, so anyone can be referred, any door. They're all screened consistently, often just based on that screening. Like I said, it just triggers some type of more informal service. However, sometimes those screenings reveal we need some more intensive, we need to take some more intensive steps. So that would trigger an assessment phase. And this can be a mental health assessment. It can be a more, actual contact the local mental health authority, get a substance use assessment. Really whatever is kind of based on those screening tools that we use, triggering into that assessment phase. Then ultimately, and this is where the change is really happening in Utah, that's dramatic and it's awesome. We're still early in it, but it's still cool, is we get to this plan phase. And this is youth and family plan with a care manager who's assigned to them, a care coordinator. And we can actually, this is where we can buy services, we can wrap families, youth and families with services and pay for them right here on the front end. So these kids aren't in custody. They might have court involvement again, but they might not. And I can tell you how this has primarily worked right now, most places in the state. Like I said, our biggest referral source are schools. But where it works the very best is we have this kind of integration. So the schools, they have their behavior management responses and they have kind of their tiers. And when they recognize, okay, all of these things that we have in our tool belt are not working, we need something else. We need someone who has maybe a little more expertise in kind of getting and procuring these types of services. So that's really dynamic. And I think it's really impactful because again, it's really knocking down that wall that used to say, well, but you got to be in our custody. That's not a good enough answer anymore. So ultimately it'll result in the youth and family plan and then just kind of a follow-up stage. And I'll be able to share, like I said, a few data points with you guys now, even though this is new. So part of this transformation in the juvenile system and juvenile justice services, I often think of it as kind of a 4-part, and maybe I'll only think 3 parts right now. Policy, right? There's policy change, there's practice change. Actually, before policy change, is probably philosophical change, policy change, House Bill 239 and subsequent bills. Practice change, which is like our youth service model, an actual front end early intervention model, and also in some circumstances a physical change. So as our numbers have continued to decrease in detention, we have capacity, but we still need, this picture's a little washed out right now, but I guess not for you guys on the screen. This was a locked detention space in Washington County. This is the one I'm showing you here. We still operate our detention out of that building, but we were able to take a whole unit and actually turn it into kind of crisis residential. So this is used for, disruption. It can be a step down from hospital setting, also kids in child welfare custody, or, kids who've disrupted from a foster care placement. It's also our receiving center. So when I think of juvenile reform, I mostly think of this kind of funnel. And I think of a funnel, like pre-reform, a funnel was a little bit like this, and they came into kind of some of the same juncture, which is petitions and detention, right? Post-reform, we set a clear line onto that funnel, and it's kind of always the question, well, what are we doing over here in this space? And so that's what all of this kind of transformation and transition is about, is making sure that we are having a responsive service array and service delivery on that end of the funnel. This is Weber Valley. So we're close here. We've got a couple Weber County folks here. So just again, this speaking to audiences from around the state, seeing this actually came about right when reform came into place, but this one is an existing building that was built from the ground up with this same idea in place. These multi-use facilities. This is Farmington Bay. So this will be our newest receiving center and youth service center in Utah. This will actually be opening just in a couple weeks. So it'll serve here, this county in Davis County. So this was a large detention facility that was built at one time, and at one time it was double booked. It was double bunked and it was full. Now today I have my long-term girls secure in one unit. We still operate a 16-bed detention unit, and now we'll be opening in just a couple weeks this receiving center in a partnership with Davis Behavioral. So again, I think it's really significant. I know you guys are hearing a lot about this receiving center space in the adult system right now. What's interesting is the juvenile system has had receiving center models for quite some time. we do need to continue to bolster them, and we are bringing more of them online to make this pivot, to make this transformation. So a couple numbers I wanted to share with you guys. So this is all of our receiving centers and crisis shelters statewide. So this will give you guys an idea of how this is utilized as a resource for law enforcement and by our other community partners. So our receiving centers and crisis care, non-residential. So that's just kids brought in the door, maybe it's this kind of timeout, this respite, moving from there. About 2,500 kids, and these are all unique youth, unique identified youth. Actually, receiving center are crisis care that have, a residential stay. So maybe they stayed just overnight, maybe they stayed a couple days. That number is about 2,200 youth. This is just this last year. Now our youth service model, which like I said, some of that infrastructure has existed, but now the ability to get services to these youth, this is our youth service model. We've had this last year, we had about 1,700 referrals into that kind of front door space. The triage is about right, about 799 moved on to assessments. So meaning that, a good chunk of those kids, they didn't need much more than kind of some type of really mild intervention or direction, again, leveraging a formal or informal support. Most of those kids assessed did move on to a formal youth and family plan, which means probably some kind of a service was delivered or procured. So, this could be everything from Families First to functional family therapy. It could be substance use treatment for mom and dad. It could be all of those things. Like there's really not a cap on the type of array we can access. And then we've got about 208 kids right now moved on to that follow-up stage. So the next step will be getting the data on how those kids are doing. And what we're looking at, like I said, because this is just this last year, we've really implemented the youth service model. Right now we'll be gathering, we easily can track the, kind of recidivism, offense, data. That's not hard. We're also looking to have some school metrics because most of these kids are school-age kids, and we want to see that they're actually, remaining stable in their environment. This is just to give you guys a fun snapshot of this vertical line. Whether any of you know it or not, you each have one of these vertical lines in your life. That for me, that was March 13th. That was COVID, like D-Day. It was the last day of the session, I remember, and it was like, schools are closing, lockdown. So this was our youth service referrals. So we just kind of been rolling this out this last year. We were up to about 500 this last month before COVID. We did take a pretty steady dip. Schools closed, all those things, they are kind of coming back up. This actual trend line too, which is interesting. I mean, this is a totally different number. But if you look like our detention admissions, it's the same trend line. It's exactly like that. We just went like that. Right now they're statewide, they're about stable right now. We had probably this, I'm talking about detention admissions. We probably had an all-time low, probably about a month into COVID. Right now they're still low. One thing that's been happening that is interesting, that I always share with our court partners, is the decrease in kind of technical violations, which is really, I think, from my lens, having to operate the facility and manage a pandemic, that's reassuring and helpful. I don't have that data point here, but if you're looking at it, it's like those used to represent about 25% of our intakes at detention was some type of a violation, some type of a technical. Those are down to about 5% right now. So that's dramatic, and that's stayed consistent throughout COVID. I don't know what that all means. That could raise more questions than answers. But I think it's something we just kind of continue to watch and kind of see, okay, what does this mean? We do have more, our home detention numbers are the highest they've ever been right now, which is good. Our home detention numbers, we have more kids on home detention than in locked detention right now. And that's never happened either. So those things cross over. This was just a quick snapshot I wanted to share that I thought was useful. We'll have this data soon for the whole state. Actually, my folks are working on 2nd District right now because I think it tells us a story. I think there's still a lot more we need to look at to see what the full story is. But what this is, and I'm going to just walk you through this. I know it's hard for the people here to see, but not the people online. So this is use of detention in the 5th District. So we were just down there. We just had an open house. We have a new receiving center, youth service center down there. So we pulled this data for 5th. So this is Beaver, Iron, and Washington County. So over the last 5 full fiscal years, 726 youth were served in detention, unique youth. Prior to reform, since 2016, we had our high for that judicial district of 20 youth per night in locked detention. So that's detention trends nationally have been going down for the last 10 years-ish. But for this specific district, and I haven't looked yet, like I said, they're just pulling that data, the high they had of those facilities, so this is my facility in Iron County, facility in Washington County, 20 youth per night in those locked settings. In all of 5th district, that number's down to 4 right now. So 4 youth per night in locked detention. So that's a really dramatic shift. As that's occurred, we've been able to we have 26 locked detention beds in 5th district that we've taken offline. One of them, 16 of them we actually converted. You guys saw a picture of that with the bed busted out. In 2020, but now this is the more significant part, I think. It's one thing to set policy and say, okay, they can't come through that door anymore. It's another thing to say, okay, but now what are we doing, right? In 2020, we served about 450 unique youth in our front end, crisis shelter, early intervention, day skills programs. But here's this one, I love this number, I'm so happy to see this. Our average count of youth in those services now is 29 youth per day. So you can see this just direct shift of, our nightly bed count and detentions drop, but the number of youth we are serving through these early kind of preventative services is the hope, is increasing at a good pace. Any questions? We're just clipping along here. What time do I got till? It's like
2:30.
Oh. I thought we had till like 4 or something. I mean, I can do this all day. Like I'll get some jokes going. He's like, just focus, Brett. Mm-hmm. You can see me. Okay, so I wanted you guys to be able to kind of have a feel for that. And again, I know that as questions come up, like I said, so I gave you my cell phone, call me, and I can get you in touch with. The other thing I would encourage each of you, if you don't know your local administrators in JGS, that's partially on us. I would encourage that relationship to get forged. Some of you know me, so maybe it's not as necessary, especially if you're on the Wasatch Front, but especially in rural communities, get to know that person because they're at a lot of tables to have a good feel of what the resources are. So if you're in again, in 5th district, I've got 2 what we call APDs, which are facility directors in 5th district, Jill McKinley and Barry Howard. Both people that are, in this space, like I said, they're at a lot of the tables. So they have those good partnerships with the court, they have the partnerships with the schools, they know the human services continuum, they know what services are available, what they're not available. So wherever you're at, I would encourage that. And please reach out to me if you want help in kind of guiding that. Because I always will answer my phone and I hopefully you'll learn that I'm someone you can approach an email or whatever like that. But sometimes having that local person that's right in 2nd district, right in 3rd district, that's where the magic happens, as it were. Locally, there's the solutions I found. Okay, so let's go to our secure care changes. Again, some of you may have seen some of this, and you'll have to bear with me. We'll try to liven it up. Now, this is our, again, because of reform, we have a changing population. The good side of that is our population is really consistent. The challenging side is the kids in our care are typically very high risk. We used to, like if you used to look at a JJS roster prior to reform, and if we can classify, we can see what a risk level is, based on a validated risk tool. We can look at that. You used to look at that roster. Yellow was like a moderate risk kid. You'd see a lot of moderate risk kids in a setting. If you're talking Mill Creek here in 2nd district, you'd see a lot of kind of a mix. and then you'd see a chunk of red. All of the youth we have in secure care are typically going to be rating as that kind of high risk. So that's, I think, again, I think the consistency in population helps us kind of dial in our approach, but it obviously brings other challenges as well, which we continue to navigate. So this was, we don't really need to spend too much time on this. This was when we really, so about a year after reform, with the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, we really dug in and said, okay, what is it fundamentally we want to make sure we're delivering on in secure care? We all know that in this space, risk of recidivism or recidivism rates are obviously a key indicator, and I think for obvious reasons. And we recognize that, and we still track recidivism rates. But we also recognize that when you're talking recidivism rates, there's a lot of things to be factored in. There's a lot of considerations. Also, no one looks at them the same way, which is always interesting. I'll be at a national table, juvenile justice table, and I'll hear someone say, yeah, our secure population recidivism rate's like 5% or something. And I'm like, well, let's dig into that a little. Are you looking at just those who are recommitted to you? Are you looking at those who just those who pick up a felony? Like, help me understand that a little better. And so there's all of that. So one thing that we knew that we felt we had more control on and that we could measure was reducing the risk of recidivism, reducing the risk to reoffend based on the PRA. So that was our goal. Our goal was to get to 25% in 3 years, so 2021. To have at least an average of 25% risk reduction for every youth that comes in, an average reduction of 25%. So the concept we used, and I kind of go over this on a high level because I think it's something that we continue to use it, but it's just good, I think, all the way around. Like whenever you're looking at approaches and implementation, I think it's something that can be really helpful. So the concept is front loading. It's FIT is the concept: front loading, intensity, time, and type. So when we looked at our services that we were delivering to the youth in our care, how would that apply? So the first was this front loading. So making sure with the youth and the family, from day one, we developed a plan of success. So this really is the term we often use, kind of the full kit term, that they knew from day one, here's the things you need to succeed. When they did juvenile reform in Utah, when they had the juvenile justice oversight, juvenile justice working group, they interviewed, Pew came in and all these stakeholders and the Chief Justice and President of the Senate, all these folks came in, right? Part of their work was they interviewed many of our youth, both in secure care, but also in community placements. One thing that consistently came up with those kids is they didn't have a clear picture of when our custody would end. And that was I think that was something we had to adapt and do a better job of. So this is part of that. I was trying to help the youth have a clear plan of success. The intensity part is based on research. What we recognize and pulled from the literature is that a certain amount of evidence-based treatment or dosage given for moderate to high-risk youth is going to give you your best shot of reducing recidivism. And so we ensure that every youth, that's the intensity, gets that 12 and a half hours of dosage every week. For us, the core of that is DBT, which is a cognitive behavioral approach. That's kind of a skills-based approach. It's centered on kind of mindfulness, and I'll stop there because, not my whole presentation, but on DBT, because I am a lawyer by trade, not a clinician. So I'll just make myself look silly if I try to further explain it. But it is really kind of a skill-driven set of approaches. That dosage can also be made up. Maybe they do have a CBT class. Maybe they have a substance use class. We actually can track all of those things, kind of this, again, the kind of menu customized to the individual youth to the point that you can, that it's realistic. So that was the intensity piece. The time was this 200 hours while in care, looking at the presumptive length, 3 to 6 months. So most of them we had to build it around that. And then the remaining hours to be completed in the community. And the type for us was the dialectical behavioral therapy. So quickly, and then I'll go through this kind of quick because I don't want to overly bore you guys. So we had to develop a system to track all these things. So that's how we were going to define success. Okay, are we getting to that goal of reducing recidivism by 25%? Reducing the risk of recidivism, sorry. So this is how with the youth, this is just a meter we can see, okay, where are they at on dosage? This kid's in green. So he's actually beyond this dosage, so probably been there a while. You can see their priority risk factors they're working on. And we can pull all that up kind of at a snapshot view. Another thing that's really interesting, and again, I apologize to the audience here because it's not as clear. As we started kind of rolling this out, we developed a really deep, sorry, I hope I don't fit away from that mic too much, a really detailed approach to behavioral management and how to identify behaviors, good, compliant, and non-compliant. So we have a ton of data on this now. Like it's just, we're about a year into full implementation, but we track, so any kid I can pull up and I can look at their pro-social behaviors versus non-compliant behaviors. And obviously that gives you a pretty good quick gauge on how they're doing. What is this, why do we do all that? It's so our decisions can be driven by the data. It's so that we're not, what's the title of your guys' conference? Overcoming bias, something along those lines. That's the idea. Too often, we do have to use instinct, obviously, to some degree, but too often we would have a kid coming in and say, I don't know, I don't think they're doing so well. We're not gonna talk about release. Another kid coming in, I feel like they're on the right track. Now we know, we can kind of parse through it, and also with the parole authority, we can provide this data and say, they've been doing good in their treatment, and here's their behaviors. So we can see, so these are some of the things we track. So these are every day, my staff log these things, and I know they probably don't love it, but it is helpful. So like horseplay, swearing at someone, off task, disruptive, war stories, boundaries, disrespecting others, not following directions, swearing. So for this youth, those were the items. Those were the non-compliant behaviors. But for me, what's more important is identifying those pro-social behaviors in these youth, because as you guys know in juvenile justice, a high majority of these kids, they are going to be returning to our communities. So we want to help foster those pro-social beliefs and behaviors. So here, this means that it was an acknowledged behavior, it was a demonstrated behavior, and it was kind of acknowledged and tracked. So well-groomed, clean bedroom, good time management, positive attitude during contact, all of these things. So all of these things are helping us create a more rich picture when we look at youth. Now this is more for the legislature type slide. We have to do a QT over OE, which is our quality throughput over operating expense. And so JJS, because we've been hitting those marks on reduction of risk, our expenses, we haven't asked for new money. We've been able to kind of continue to actually decrease. Our QTOE metric, which is just a way to evaluate value for a taxpayer, is on a really good trajectory. This is just something we use with our youth in care. Again, helping them know, when you think about that concept I was talking about, helping them know where they're at and what they're trying to approach. Down here is, so their priority risk factors identified in their risk assessment. So drugs, sense of responsibility, belief in use of physical aggression, consequential thinking, and this is their dosage. And as they achieve the dosage needed in each of those areas, that will come off that list. And that's just a way for the youth to see, okay, here's where I'm at on the old mountain. So just a tool. These metrics, so again, our measure was this 25%. This is 31%. We're actually right at the 25% mark. This is a little, I just looked at it the other day. We've been doing, like I said, we're coming up on our 2021, and right now we're right at that, about 25% if you average them out. This one was like 2 quarters ago. So, a couple other outcomes that I think are relevant for each of you. One thing that's really significant that we've seen, we still have assaults in our facilities, but since we have switched and had this real focus on dosage, we've also increased our ratio. Our assaults are down about 50% over the last 15 months, and that's huge. I mean, the kids, our staff, like, fundamental number one thing, I have to ensure my staff feel safe. I have to ensure these kids feel safe. So that's big when we can see that type of an outcome. Okay, so if you guys remember, there was, we were talking a while ago about House Bill 384, our population is getting older, and it probably will continue to do so. So what are we doing in that space? These are things that I think are also helpful for you as you're seeing kids and maybe they're coming into custody. So we just went live with this Davis Technical College partnership. So they're going to be offering vocational services eventually in all of our facilities. They're going to be starting at Mill Creek and Decker. And they're pretty extensive. And so the hope is, we're going to have a welding certification. We have an actual welding trailer where they can come up and pass off their test. And the hope is you got a kid, he's 20 years old, he's 21 years old, he's phasing out of JGS, he can go get a job welding for, $19 an hour. It gives them a better chance of making that good transition. And that's something we have to continue to invest in. So that's coming online. This legislative session, I know Representative Snow just opened a bill file. I don't have any super heavy lift legislation this year. Hopefully, fingers crossed so far. Concurrent enrollment is, so youth in our custody, they're eligible for concurrent enrollment because they're in a local school district, but we're not going to have master's level teachers that are coming into, say, Mill Creek or Decker Lake. And so what this legislation will do is, right now, currently, Snow College, they offer concurrent enrollment for all of your rural high schools. And it's a virtual experience with a professor at Snow College. I don't think this will end up being with Snow College, but it's going to be the same idea. That's to say, all our kids in custody, incarcerated youth in our secure care settings, they'll be eligible, and we'll set up some type of a virtual environment. They'll be able to get those concurrent enrollment classes. So hopefully they're a couple steps closer to an associate's degree, maybe even a bachelor's degree, as they're phasing out of our care. In that SLIC partnership in Decker Lake, we have that similar partnership going. So, I believe that's it.
Yes.
Any questions?
There is one.
Okay.
Okay. Do you know whether or not there will be any research done to determine the impact the juvenile reform efforts have had on crime rates? And will we be able to find out whether crime rates have increased or decreased as a result of the reforms?
So yes, hopefully everyone heard that question. A question on research relative to crime rates. Yes, that will be done. I mean, I think that the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee, that's something that they want to know and they want to see. They want to be able to see, okay, what are the impacts? Where are we hitting the mark? Where are we not hitting the mark? I mean, I can tell you guys high level, like the things where we're hitting the mark is reinvestment, right? I can see that. It's dollars into bank accounts and services. But on some of those things like offense rates, things like that, crime rates, those things they're going to have to dig into and they are going to have to look at. When we think about adult reform, this last session, we just reviewed the data seeing our prison population going up, right? So those are all things that I think, yes, those are in the process. I did recently, I know the courts right now are polling to look at number of referrals to see the pace. They actually were down in 2018. 19, they were down from pre-reform. 2020, and this isn't my data, but what I've seen is 2020 they were on pace. They would have probably surpassed 2019. COVID has drastically changed that. So I do think that will be a hard thing for this last year across the board. Like it's going to be hard to really read some of that number. So answer is yes, there will be research done to get to the very core of how this is helping us and if we are on the right course.
I do have a question about youth services. It seems like more frequently I get calls from parents.
Mm-hmm.
Kid maybe has some, got caught with drugs, something like that, but the whole backstory is correct. They'll be on the phone with me for 20 minutes with my child does this, my child does that, not listening to this. Nothing I do, and they're just frustrated, they're at the end of their wits. I can just say, go to this website, referrals, GPS Youth Services, and you'll get some help there.
Yep.
Who pays for that, by the way?
The state, we do.
Okay.
Yep, it's all covered. That's something that we're able to do. And yes, you can just send them there. You can put it, the referral is really simple. I actually have it on here. It's jgs.utah.gov. And then if you go in, and I can send the link and everything, you can actually even put in the referral and say, hey, I got this call. I mean, you can explain it. And then my plan managers, their obligation is to make sure there's follow-up to whoever the referent is within 48 hours. And we can help take it from there. Because we see those are the situations.
Okay, because I got parents who at their wits' end, and like, I'm afraid my child's going to wind up dead one day.
Absolutely.
And, as a prosecutor, what can I do unless they commit a crime?
Yep.
So, okay.
Yep. And I'm happy to, especially up there where you guys are at Second District, we've got a really good presence there. We've got some great staff who've worked in that space for a while. So, I think it could be a really, really good resource for you.
Great.
Okay,
All right, thank you, Rick.
thank you, everybody.
Okay, we will take a break for 15 minutes and be back at 2:45.